right, and yesterday former President Jacob Zuma appeared before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry for the second day, and he began his testimony by saying that there had been death threats against him, his family and staff. In addition, Zuma's lawyers objected to the evidence leader Paul Pretorius' questioning and stated that he was not asking clarity-seeking questions but rather cross-examining Zuma. Among Zuma's supporters, ANC Secretary General Magashule said that the former president was a victim of character assassination. So to talk to us about these developments over the past 2 days and what we could possibly still expect is political analyst Sandile Swana. Thanks so much for speaking to us once again. So I want to start here. There's that saying that you don't set up a commission of inquiry unless you know what the outcome is going to be. And we sometimes forget that it was actually the very self-same former President Jacob Zuma who had to set up this particular commission of inquiry. And looking at how his anticipated testimony has gone over these past 2 days, are you surprised at what you've seen from Zuma?
First of all, the simple thing here is that Zuma is on the defensive, and some people mistakenly think that Zuma is going there to go and confess. Zuma is a trained intelligence officer. He is not going to try and implicate himself or confess anything at that commission. But then going back to the issue of setting up the commission in the first place, the document that Zuma had before setting up this commission was the document that came from Public Protector Thuli Madonsela at the time. And it was a very simple document that said there must be an investigation into state capture, and the entities that must be investigated is Zuma and the Gupta family. The Zuma family, and it was as narrow as that. And Zuma looked at the thing and said, look, this thing is going to take me out and take me out alone. So he expanded the terms of reference to include any type of person who could have been one way or the other at any level of government involved in any type of state capture. And he signed that, I think it was the 23rd of January last year. So basically that was that. And if you want to know what did Zuma expect out of it, he was expecting some of his comrades and other types of people to be implicated in this, not only himself. And that did happen. I think, some people, when they heard about Bosasa for the first time, they were blown away. So basically that is where we are with this.
And of course, he had said this before, and he continues to hold on to this, does the former president, that there is no such thing as state capture.
Yes, he does. I heard him quite well articulating that argument. But state capture is also a formal term, and it has got definitions that were introduced to us in the year 2000 by the World Bank, based on the happenings in the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. And what state capture does is that it produces the oligarchs that you've seen coming out of the former Soviet Union. So the question today is, if there has been state capture, has there any emergence of oligarchs? And the concrete realization of that would be people like the Gupta family, who have become multi-millionaires by extracting resources specifically from the state. So that is that, and it also involves creating certainty. When you capture the state, the outcome of any process of the state, you need to know, because you are actually driving the state. So you reduce certainty for yourself, you eliminate uncertainty for yourself, but you also give the other people certainty that they are not going to get anything because you're going to get it all.
Now, by your explanation about the emergence of oligarchs, from this, the benefit that derives from doing business with the state, that would suggest, it would imply that state capture is a permanent, pervasive phenomenon.
It doesn't have to be permanent. We've seen the oligarchs, even in Russia itself, having to run for cover. Some of them no longer are persona non grata in Russia, as Putin was also trying to say. He sent some of them to prison. Some of them have been killed one way or the other. Some are living in exile. So state capture is not a permanent phenomenon by its very nature. When you try to limit access to economic resources, you are actually laying the ground for another revolution of one kind or the other. Somebody is going to rebel. And I think we need to be aware of this, although it is not in this testimony. I think it does need to be discussed that part of the tension that is there in South Africa right now around this issue of state capture. For instance, taking just maybe 2 or 3 cases, at Eskom, people lost their coal supplying contracts. Glencore lost their contracts, and they testified at this commission that the state, the Minister of Minerals, put so much pressure on them that they had to hand over the Optimum mine to the Gupta family. Now, we may not all like Glencore, but it is worrying that a company operating in South Africa can, by virtue of not being a member of a particular ANC faction, lose ownership of an asset, lose contracts, state contracts. So on the one hand, Brian Molefe was putting pressure. On the other hand, Musebenzi Zwane was putting pressure, and that pincer movement was able to get that contract out of them and hand it over to the Gupta brothers. Again, the same idea was applied in the Northern Cape, where the mineral rights at Sishen were actually 21.4% of those mineral rights were taken by fraudulent means from Kumba iron ore and given to Imperial Crown, which was actually a Gupta company. And that matter went to court, and by coincidence, by the way, it was Judge Raymond Zonda who eventually ruled that it was a fraudulent activity and returned those mineral rights to the rightful owners, and and that consortium lost them.
So what I want to ask is whether this is peculiar to the Zuma years in government, or whether we've seen these types of developments where companies have been fraudulently pushed out of certain contracts and positions prior to this, or was this something peculiar to the Zuma years?
No, this, I think it would be wrong at any time to think that state capture was Zuma's idea. It was continuing before that, because when you look at companies like Bosasa, just Bosasa, which by some, like people like the Mail and Guardian believe that they started paying Nomvula Mokonyane in the year 2002 under the Mbeki presidency. Now, you don't start paying politicians for no good reason. If you're a business person, when you pay politicians, you are paying the politicians so that there are solid economic benefits, especially from the state, that are going to come from you. So there are other people. For instance, there are other processes. As an example, the one that cost Gigaba his job, when Oppenheimer was doing business with the ANC and getting letters of support from the ANC for the luxury airport, the terminal that he wanted at OR Tambo. Yeah. So that process itself went through other channels other than the Zuma consortium. And I think the Guptas and the Guptas and Gigaba caught on to it late in the game, in the day, whilst the other ANC factions had already done something about it, and they were trying to reverse it in favor of the Guptas, and it became a problem, and it cost Gigaba his job. So there are other factions that are also running their own state capture programs in South Africa, even today.
So coming back to former President Jacob Zuma and his appearance before the Zonda Commission, and I think if the outpouring of concern and comments on social media and of course other platforms is anything to go by, South Africans seem rather disappointed by how this has panned out to date, because as you said, there was no way that the former president was going to come there and confess and implicate himself, but somehow people expected it to turn out differently. What do you make of that?
I think our people are very poor at understanding history, because for the longest time Zuma has gone to court in front of us. And we've seen how he conducts himself in court. Sometimes he profiles himself as a traditional Zulu tribesman who knows nothing. But this is a highly trained intelligence officer. Zuma is a very, very intelligent, highly trained intelligence officer who was trusted by one of the greatest African leaders and intellectual, Oliver Tambo. So this is not an idiot by any stretch of imagination. And he's not going to go anywhere, including when they eventually take him to court and confess to anything. Remember that as an intelligence officer, he is trained in interrogation, he's trained in counter-interrogation, he is trained to hide the truth.
So if we look at what he has definitely, made pay to, for example, when he talks about the former minister Ngwako Ramatlhodi, says he was a spy and he was recruited while he was a student in Lesotho. He speaks to that. And why do you think he went there? Because it was clear, even from the utterances leading up to that particular statement, that he had singled out Ngwako Ramatlhodi. Why do you think that is?
I think we need to look at Ngwako Ramatlhodi as well, where he comes from. And this is in what I'm about to say is in Ngwako's testimony. Earlier on, when Zuma fell out with Mbeki, or he was fired, let's not say he fell out, he was fired for one reason, because you never know what the tactics are in all of this. When he left the presidency as a deputy president, he was now unemployed. Kgalema Motlanthe was Secretary General of the African National Congress at that time, set up two committees. One committee led by Lindiwe Sisulu, which had members Tony Yengeni, Ngwako Ramatlhodi, all designed, and Judge Heath, to actually defend Zuma and extricate him from the charges he was facing and all the problems he had with the Scorpions and the NPA. And Ramatlhodi himself at that time was facing charges, his own corruption charges related to CPS and other deals that he had been involved in. They successfully extricated Zuma, and Mshe came in as the head of the NPA and actually dropped charges against Ramatlhodi and dropped charges against Zuma, and they became buddies, and Zuma appointed him to be the Minister of Correctional Services and so on and so forth.
But right there's something rather macabre, very perverse, in that it seems to suggest that the former president, given the resources he has with regard to intelligence, is manipulating that evidence in terms of how he gets people to either perhaps, be on his side or do what he wants them to do. Because if he knew that Ngwako Ramatlhodi was a spy, wasn't it incumbent upon him to act one way or another on that information?
Well, you cannot say he did not act, because Zuma explains some of these things. Some of the people who are spies, you allow them to continue as if you don't know anything about it.
To what end, though?
For instance, if somebody is spying for somebody else and they know that you don't know that they are spying on you, so you can now control the information you feed them so that they feed your opponents wrong information. All those things of spycraft are there. But coming to the point again of this, the point that I see that Zuma is busy with this issue of talking about spies, first of all, is undermining the political credibility, not the credibility of Ngwako as a witness. It's the political credibility, because Zuma wants to mobilize a mass of people politically behind him as he fights all these court cases. So he is starting to undermine the people who are leading this thing that Zuma is involved in state capture, etc., who are opposing him and the Guptas. And one of those things is actually there. But what I wanted to highlight is that some of these people that are now being discredited were actually are the ones who rescued Zuma from the scrap heap and put him into power, and he rewarded them, and they later quarreled. And now he is actually sending a warning to the NEC of the ANC that if you continue not to do what Kgalema did for me, put a rescue package for me out of this mess, I might go down with all of you.
And just finally, the name of Johan Rupert comes up in his testimony as well, talking about how he would basically, along with others, one would suppose then, act to destabilize the economy by devaluing the rand if Pravin Gordhan is not the Minister of Finance. Again, our reaction to that as a nation, because it seemed rather subdued. Should we have been more outraged at that sort of allegation?
Unfortunately, that allegation is also not far from the truth in a general sense, that there are people who are able to even manipulate the currency of this country. Our banks have admitted, including Maria Ramos, that they know how to manipulate the currency of this country. In 1996, I was actually a student at the University of Pretoria, and some of our professors told us that the Afrikaner business people pressured Mandela to abandon the RDP, and they threatened him with manipulating the rand, that they could make the rand to collapse. So some of those things are not entirely far from the truth. Whether it was Rupert specifically is another issue. But in this country, there are people who have enough resources and capacities to actually collapse the rand and collapse many other things in the economy.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Sandile Swana, political analyst, talking to us about the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture and the testimony of former President Jacob Zuma to date. Time now for your news at